We have a lot of employers ask us just about questions that they're able to answer or ask during interviews and things like that. And one that some employers we've seen asking about are specifically when someone has perhaps a physical limitation, but one that still would allow them to do the job, but the employer maybe has to navigate that situation. So one that came up recently, an employer asked us if they're interviewing an applicant who is deaf, what are the appropriate ways to ask questions about how they need to be accommodated on the job, and what are the requirements of the employer to communicate with that applicant, and how should they go about that and navigate something like that?
That's a good question. I think the common denominator or the most basic answer to this is how to ask. The answer is politely. And I don't mean to be facetious. There's nothing wrong with asking someone, how do you communicate, or how do you want me to accommodate you when you come in? How do you want me to, or what should I know about your disability in a way that actually allows us to have a productive conversation or a conversation when you come in? These sound like serious issues, or it sounds like a serious question, but it's not. We have the right to speak with each other. What we don't have the right to do is to treat each other negatively because of that disability. So if you're asking someone, hey, John, how would you like to be accommodated? I see that you actually have a hearing disability. What is it that we need to do to be prepared for you when you come in? There's just no way this can be interpreted in a negative way. But telling someone, hey, I hear you're deaf. I don't know if we can have that conversation in person. Well, it's the attitude now that is the problem. And that's clearly an unwillingness to accommodate. So someone who's deaf has a physical disability that they're living with. It doesn't stop them from continuing to work. And, for you to invite someone who's deaf to an interview, you probably saw something in the interview that you liked anyway, which is great. Having them deliver the work is not contingent on whether they can hear or not. If they can, a lot of deaf people, for example, are exceptionally good lip readers. And some may not be. I don't know. My ignorance about this doesn't make me a discriminatory person. It just means that I need to ask John better questions, or wholesome questions, full picture questions on what we need to do to be able to make sure that he has a fair shot in that interview. If this person comes in and they're not able to communicate with you, and you're not actually answering their questions or asking your questions in a way that you're getting the answers from them, and that just put sort of sticks in the wheels of that interview, then that can be viewed as a discriminatory interview. It is not an interview that accommodates people with the disabilities. So the fact that, Derek, there's a question there that, how do I ask? That's a great indicator that there's no intention to discriminate there. If that's the case, then just carry on, or one would have to carry on and be polite in asking, what is it else that we want to do? For example, some people say, Chris, can I ask my employee where they're from? Yes, there's nothing that stops you from asking someone, what country are you from, or what country are your origins from? It will become problematic if, as soon as you get your answer, you turn around and say, oh, isn't that where all the thieves come from, for example? But that's a different issue now, and that is discriminatory. But just asking someone questions that are good faith questions for the purpose of accommodating that person's disability or requirement, then there's nothing wrong with you asking whatever the question is that you'd like to ask, provided that it's polite. And I'm assuming here we're talking to sophisticated people, so I'm not going to qualify what you as long as it's polite, I don't want someone to spin something that is outright discriminatory, but being asked in a polite way, like, excuse me for the bother, but is it true that everyone in your country is a thief? Well, that's still discriminatory, even though you may come across as polite. So I'm going to assume that the questions are good faith questions to know what is required to accommodate that individual.
That makes a lot of sense. And, specifically, just as you were explaining some of these situations and how an employer might accommodate, it came to mind specifically with a candidate who is deaf. I actually just recently learned that Google Meet and I think Zoom now also supports live transcription. And I actually have a friend that is deaf, and we have Google Meet calls all the time, and he is able to simply read the transcription, and we have no problem at all. So definitely technology is starting to come into play to help even more.
You're right. And employers are actually required to make use of technology and anything else within their means to make that person's job easier. It is to a certain point. It is to a point of undue hardship. What constitutes undue hardship is up for debate. A restaurant is probably going to be okay hiring someone who is deaf and still find a suitable place for them to work without really much expense added or without too much of bending backwards to make that happen. So expectations from that organization would be higher than someone, for example, with one employee only. But even then, it's really subjective, and on a case-by-case basis that this would have to be evaluated, not subjective, but objective in how it's evaluated, but subjective to the individual case about what type of accommodation is needed. Some employers with just one employee may still be required to accommodate to points that we would be surprised. But you're absolutely right that there are very easy ways to accommodate, but ways don't have to be easy for you to be forced to accommodate. You may actually have to pay for software that, for example, transcribes or allow for example, someone who can't type on a regular keyboard or who's blind, for example, to be able to transcribe or type how they need to do with specific tools that you as an employer may have to buy. That doesn't mean it crosses the point of undue hardship. It doesn't mean, well, it's too much for that employer. You may still have to do that anyway. So it's certainly, discrimination and accommodation to discrimination is actually an ongoing conversation between a lot of employers and their lawyers. It is not sort of, here's the answer, and now you know how to apply it, because even lawyers themselves debate to what extent one can and should do something. That's literally the type of case that ends up at the human rights tribunals or in courts for these very facts.